Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. I am your co-host, Tim Hannon, and with me as always.
I'm Steve Wirt.
And on this episode, we are going to talk about the Steelers and the Denver Broncos. The Steelers have had a lot of rivalries over the years, and if you ask somebody who's the Steelers' biggest rival, I think a lot of that depends on when you ask the question, right? So if you would have asked in the 70s, people would have said the Oakland Raiders or the Houston Oilers. If you asked in the 90s, people might have said Cleveland or even Jacksonville for a short time when they were playing in the same division as us. And I think if you ask people today, a lot of people would answer with the Baltimore Ravens. I think, though, that very few people would answer that question by saying the Denver Broncos, right?
The Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos are always like I don't. They're an old school AFC team, which they're not a traditional rival. Like when I think of like traditional rivals for the Steelers, always think of like Giants, Eagles, Packers, Bears, like the teams that we played back in the like 30s through 60s that we stunk when we stunk, you know. And like the newer rivals, definitely. Well, even the Browns are pretty, but the Browns are definitely our biggest rival for a long time. And then finally, and they kind of took that with them to Baltimore,
Right.
but like maybe the Browns are starting to get good again, so maybe they're kind of coming back on the radar a little bit. But Jacksonville definitely was they won so much coming out of the gate, and like you said, we're in that big division too. Like there was like what, 6 teams in that division, or
Yeah.
it
Yep.
was yeah, it was a large division, and like Houston too. Like everybody forgets about the Houston Oilers. Like that
Yeah.
was a big rivalry back in the 70s. So
Yep. Yep. So yeah, lots of good rivals, but with Denver, the Steelers and Broncos have actually met 8 times in the postseason, and that's the most in AFC history. In fact, the only more common matchup in NFL history for playoffs is Rams versus Cowboys, but almost all of those meetings were in the 70s. And the Steelers and Broncos have been playing each other in the playoffs over the past 5 decades. They've actually played each other in all 5 decades since the AFL NFL merger in the playoffs at least once, sometimes multiple times. So
and I'm thinking of these games, boy, they're well, I'll let you get into it, but there's not a lot of success here, is there?
for the Steelers, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so the 8 games, the Broncos win 5 of those, the Steelers win 3 of those, and we'll talk through those. Um, the winner of that game between the Steelers and Broncos, those 8 playoff games, actually goes on to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl 6 of those 8 times. So it ends up being an important game. Um, and so we'll kind of dive into that. And uh, for the purpose of this episode, we're going to stick to those 8 playoff games. There are definitely some notable regular season games between these two teams that we could delve into. But again, eight playoff games against each other is more than the Steelers have played against any other team, and so I think that's significant. And I think that we'll kind of talk at the end, like, well, does that really constitute a rivalry, given the fact that these two teams have met with so much on the line so many times, right? And because I love fun facts, we will also share a fun fact from each of these 8 games as well.
Ooh,
So
sounds like fun.
that's why they're called fun facts. So we'll start off with their first ever playoff game against each other. That's in 1977 at Denver. So the AFL NFL merger happens in 1970, and that puts the NFL's Steelers, like you said, Steve, they were kind of the old school team, against, and also the AFL's Broncos, into this new American Football Conference with each other. And in the 1970s, you have 4 teams who dominate the AFC. It's the Steelers, Dolphins, Raiders, and Colts. Those 4 teams had the most playoff appearances in that decade. And by 1977, they're the only 4 teams who've represented the AFC in the Super Bowl. And they've all won at least one Super Bowl. So those are like the big four.
Wait a minute, you missed the Chiefs. Or no, that was that 60s?
That was 1969, and that was pre-merger. So
really?
So yes.
Super Bowl. I thought Super Bowl III was not the merger.
Nope. Super Bowl. So Super Bowl 5 in 1970. That was the year that the two leagues merged together, and that's the first year they had like an AFC championship game and an NFC championship game.
Yeah, because this first Super Bowl was the AFL NFL championship game.
The first four Super Bowls, even though they started calling it the Super Bowl, the first four Super Bowls are still AFL NFL. So it's not until the 70s that you have conferences. And from 1970 through 77, again, only those four teams have represented the AFC in the Super Bowl.
Ah, interesting.
Mm-hmm. But now, we're kind of into that later part of the decade, and there's some new blood in the conference. And one of those teams that is kind of one of those up and coming teams is Denver. They've been a mediocre team basically this whole time that they've been in the AFC, but in 1977, they go 12-2. That's good for the best record in football. And they beat out the Raiders for the AFC West Division title, which was really big at the time because, again, the Raiders were so dominant in that era. They have a new head coach. His name is Red Miller. He's named the NFL's Coach of the Year. And their quarterback is Craig Morton. He's a veteran, and he's been around for a while. He's actually the guy that was the quarterback in Dallas pre-Roger Staubach. So that's who's leading their team on offense. And really the strength of their team that year is their defense. They have this really strong defense. It has a cool nickname. It's called the Orange Crush defense because they wore those orange uniforms. And so their team is kind of the strong defense, game manager, quarterback type of team. And we'll actually see a lot of those kinds of teams as we go through this series. That'll be a common theme. Meanwhile, the Steelers, they're still a superpower. I mean, this is right in the middle of the 1970s, but they're having a difficult season in 1977. It really all starts with a bunch of training camp drama. If you heard our episode of our top 10 forgotten Pittsburgh sports stories, we delved into this a little bit. Mel Blount had filed a lawsuit against Chuck Noll. Jack Lambert and Glenn Edwards had both held out, and it got really ugly in the media and some of the back and forth. Ernie Holmes had been arrested for cocaine possession. So they come into the season with all this drama, and the Steelers were not a team that had a lot of drama. And so this was an odd season for them. The defense is also slipping. They actually allow 100 more points in 1977 than they had in 1976. So you figure you divide that over a 14-game season, you're giving up about a touchdown more a game. So that's pretty significant. And right in the middle of the season, they actually lose to Denver at Mile High Stadium, and that puts them at 4-4 on the season. So they're right at 500 right in the middle of the season, which again was unusual for that era. They do string together enough wins to take a weak AFC Central division. The one of these two teams winning their division because it was a weak division that year will also be a theme that we'll see again. But now they have to go on the road back to Denver for the divisional playoff round. And so the kind of like the matchup for this game is aging dynasty versus the hungry new kids on the block. In the first half of the game, the defense for the Steelers kind of breaks out of their season-long funk. They play really well. They hold Denver to just 44 yards. But the offense and special teams make mistakes. Franco Harris has a costly fumble, and a punt is blocked. So even though the Steelers have outgained the Broncos yardage-wise, the game's tied at 14 at halftime because of those miscues. And then in the second half, Denver is able to take the lead. They still have the lead in the fourth quarter. The Steelers are trying to come back. Bradshaw throws 2 interceptions. Both of them are to linebacker Tom Jackson, who, for those of you that grew up on ESPN's NFL Primetime like I did, you recognize TJ from that show.
From Louisville.
Yes. Yes. At the time, he's a linebacker on this Orange Crush defense. He has 2 interceptions. That second interception that Bradshaw throws is like particularly egregious. It comes as the Steelers are trying to drive for the game-winning touchdown in the final 2 minutes, and it's very Neil O'Donnell-esque, where TJ's kind of covering grass, and you have no idea where Bradshaw was even looking. So that ices the game. The final score is Broncos 34, Steelers 21. And the Steelers had led the NFL in turnovers that season. Again, it was just a sloppy down season. And they just continued that into the playoff game, made a bunch of mistakes, interceptions, fumbles, blocked punts. But then you could say that the Steelers shot themselves in the foot, but you could also say that Denver had this really great defense, and really great defenses step up and make big splash plays when the offense maybe isn't carrying them. I think for this game, for 1977, I think one thing is certain. Denver was just the better team that year. I mean, they were the better team all season, and they did enough to win that game. They do go on to beat Oakland the next week in a very controversial AFC Championship game, and then they get blown out by Dallas in Super Bowl 12.
Is that the fumble, Gary?
Yeah, that's where Denver, that championship game, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, Gary. Is that Gary Reasons or no? No,
I don't remember the guy's name, but yeah, Denver fumbles at the 1 yard line, and the referees don't call it a fumble. And Oakland has something there to cry about.
Yeah, Madden used to complain about that. That was behind the immaculate reception. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. So our fun fact for this game, I was watching the broadcast of this on the internet, and I noticed something odd. So they have the two end zones painted blue, and in one end zone it says Broncos, but in the other end zone it says Steelers. Like they painted Steelers in their end zone at Mile High Stadium. So I thought that was kind of weird, because you'd see that for like the Super Bowl, right? Where like the two end zones have the two different teams. But I don't know that I'd ever seen that at an opposing stadium. And I went and looked it up, and I guess it was actually a thing back then. Chris Creamer, who has the logo website, it's a great website if you've never seen it, and we'll post a link to this. He documents a bunch of the times where that happened. And actually the Steelers had done it too. When they hosted the 72 AFC Championship game, they had two yellow end zones, and one said Pittsburgh, and one said Miami. So I just thought that was kind of odd.
Yeah, like okay, that's kind of a weird thing to do. But I guess it's not a home. I mean, if it was a neutral site game, but that's I don't know. I wonder why it died out. I guess just nobody wanted to do that anymore.
Yeah, I guess nobody wanted to have the other team's name in their end zone. I don't know why you'd want to in the first place.
A player could dance on it or something. Yeah, your own. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Juju would have liked that. So this is thought to be like a passing of the torch game, right? The Steelers had not gone one and done in the playoffs for a while, and now their dynasty appears to be over. But hold everything, because the next game on this list is the next year, the 1978 divisional playoffs, this time at Pittsburgh. So in 1978, the Steelers proved that 1977 was not the end of their dynasty. It was just sort of a bump in the road. They go 14-2. The defense is once again dominant. Bradshaw is the league MVP. And today, that 78 team is widely considered as one of the great teams in NFL history. The Broncos are no slouch either. They're the defending AFC champions. They go 10-6. Not as dominant as their 12-2 record the year before, but still good enough to repeat as AFC West champions. And their defense is still really good too. It's ranked number 2 in the league. So that sets up a rematch in the divisional round. Again, this time it's at Three Rivers Stadium, but this one really isn't even close. The Steelers manhandle the Orange Crush defense, and they win the game 33-10. This series is going to see some heroes and some goats, and the goat of this game is Denver cornerback Steve Foley, who has the job of covering John Stallworth. Denver makes the dubious decision to double cover Lynn Swann. They fear, like, we're not going to let Lynn Swann beat us, because Lynn Swann was really at the height of his powers that year. And so they double cover Swann, and they leave Steve Foley one-on-one with Stallworth. Stallworth sets a playoff record with 10 receptions for 156 yards and a touchdown. So that's really the key to the game. The Steelers just exploit that matchup, and they win by 23 points. One of the defensive assistant coaches for Denver who came up with that game plan to leave Stallworth one-on-one with Foley is a guy named Bill Belichick.
Well, maybe he should have double covered Stallworth. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, big mistake for that guy. I doubt he did anything significant after that.
Yeah, I wonder whatever happened to him.
Yeah.
Never heard of him again.
The Steelers go on to win their third Super Bowl. The fun fact for this game, the Steelers had actually played at Denver for the last game of the regular season. So these two teams actually played each other twice in a row. And I thought that was kind of unique too, that, they played each other 2 weeks in a row because of the last game of the season and then the first playoff game.
And for a non-divisional opponent, that's kind of odd.
Well, you wouldn't see that today because now you always play inside your division the last week of the season.
Yeah.
But that only started a few years ago. And I've seen that happen before where teams play each other 2 weeks in a row because
it's
of that.
Weird. Or like when that game's like really not like if there's not a lot on the line, like I think the Jets. I remember the Jets. It happened to the Jets one year, and like they just didn't play anybody, and they didn't like they ran like it's like running back up the middle is going to be our offense today. So
yeah, especially if you're playing the team again.
Yeah, you don't want to give them anything, I
guess. So that's the two games in the 70s. Let's jump ahead to the 1984 divisional playoffs at Denver. By this point, 1984, Red Miller is out in Denver and Dan Reeves is in as the head coach. And Denver, they still had a pretty decent team going into the 80s, but they really catch a huge break when Stanford quarterback John Elway refuses to sign with the Baltimore Colts, the team that drafted him number 1 overall in the 83 draft. And he tells them, hey, I'm not going to play for you. I'll go play baseball instead. And so the Broncos jump in. They engineer a huge trade to get Elway. And, as they say, the rest is history. Elway goes on to become the single greatest player in the history of their franchise. And by 1984, he's already one of the best quarterbacks in the league. It's only his second year, but he leads Denver to a 13-3 record and an AFC West championship. And Denver is really on the precipice of becoming the dominant AFC team of the 1980s, which they do become.
At least in the AFC.
Well, yeah, and that was only saying so much because the AFC did not do very well that in that era when it came to Super Bowls.
I've always thought that if you put that Denver, like that 1980s Denver teams in like the NFC, they're probably lucky to make the playoffs. And I doubt they even make one Super Bowl. Never mind, would they make 3?
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that probably is true. But yeah, the AFC, they definitely own the AFC. And this was kind of the beginning of it, 13-3. The Steelers are kind of going in the opposite direction. Many of those players from the 70s have retired. And we detailed this. We did an episode about the 1980 Steelers. They really struggle to rebuild. They have some really poor drafts, make some really bad decisions. In 1984, Mark Malone is their quarterback, which isn't real exciting. But they actually have a decent season. They go 9-7, and lucky for them, I told you this is going to be a theme. Lucky for them, the division stinks that year, so they're in the playoffs as the AFC Central champion. And back then, you only had 2 wild cards. So the wild cards played each other in wild card week, and all 3 division champions got a bye into the division round. So they end up playing in the divisional round at Denver. Denver is heavy favorites. They're playing at home. Denver was so hard to beat at home, especially at Old Mile High. You had like that thin air. You had the loud noise. The Broncos in that stadium were 11-2 all time in the playoffs. They rarely lost at home when it came to playoff games.
I still think they are like almost. It's very tough to win in Denver. It just no matter what. It's just like regular season you can maybe pull it off, but I think in the playoffs it's almost impossible. Like
it's very difficult for sure. Yeah. But some teams have done it, and this is one of them. So that year the Broncos have a very opportunistic defense. They're second in the NFL in takeaways, and they actually scored 8 defensive touchdowns that year, which is a lot. So that defense for Denver, they make splash plays, and Chuck Noll decides to game plan around that. The whole week before the game, he has his running back. So he has these 2 running backs that are carrying a big chunk of the load that year: Walter Abercrombie and Frank Pollard, and he has them practice being stripped all week. He thinks that Denver is probably more apt to go for a strip than they are to wrap you up and tackle you. So he thinks that if he can just practice getting them to hold on to the ball no matter what, they can gain some extra yards. It doesn't go well at first. The Broncos actually recovered 2 fumbles in the first 6 minutes of the game. However, that was Malone fumbling, not the running backs.
Maybe you should have done that. Yeah, should have worked that with Mark Malone, not the running backs.
I can't hear you again.
Maybe you should have worked on that with Mark Malone. Wasn't that great of a comment.
I don't know why that goes low. Try like unplugging it and plugging back in.
Hello, can you hear me better?
Oh yeah. Wait. Talk now.
Oh, that's the.
Hello, can you hear me better now? Nothing?
I don't understand that. It's like a volume thing.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Try doing this. Maybe moving the thing around. I don't know.
Does that help any?
This is so random. I'm really interested to do the playback of this to see if it's on my end. Because you could sound totally fine on the playback. It could just be on my end.
Well, I mean, I hope it's not messed up. So you still can't hear me at all?
Like faintly, like barely. Okay, I have an idea. Go into like the little microphone in Zoom in the bottom left and hit the little arrow. See where it says audio settings?
You know what? I'm turning off the box that says automatically adjust.
That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, that's what it's doing because it's on automatically adjust.
Okay, you sound better already.
That sounds. That's what it is. That's what it was. Because okay, all right. Is that sound right? Or
Yeah, that sounds a lot better.
that's what it is. It's like for some reason it was the software was muting it or something.
Okay, so go back into that screen and turn up your volume on your mic a little bit. See if that, because now you're not low anymore, but you're like lower because it probably wasn't adjusting.
Can you hear me? See, that's all the way up.
There, yeah, perfect. That's
so just
much
leave
better.
it all the way up.
Leave it there.
How about that? Just an inch left.
Perfect.
Not.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was it. I think you're right. It was like.
Well, there was a box that said automatically adjust, and I just figured, well, it's working. I'll just leave it. And then I guess if I don't talk for a while, it just because it's probably trying to compensate for you might get some background noise now. So I don't know. We'll see.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay. All right. So anyway, Malone fumbled. Steve.
Well, poor Mark Malone. Maybe he should have practiced more on not fumbling instead of the running backs. So bad call by. Well, Chuck Noll was right. He just picked the wrong player, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I've never seen this game, So I mean, I don't know. Was it like legit fumbles? Like he just got hit and there was no helping it, or was it
Yeah,
carelessness?
I think it was like quarterback fumbles, fumbling
Okay.
snaps and things like that.
Oh, that's
So
bad. Yeah.
so yeah, so that leads to Denver taking a 7-0 lead. But the Steelers, they decide they're going to stick with the running game because with Mark Mullen as your quarterback, I think they just figure that's your best chance to beat this team. And pretty soon holes start to open up. Pollard and Abercrombie combined for 174 yards rushing in this game. And Pollard especially had a huge game. I mean, Frank Pollard did not have a stellar Steelers career, but this was definitely his signature game. He was just dominant in this playoff game. So
Well,
it's a
we're getting ready Frank Pollard's bust for the Hall of Fame for sure.
if you based it off of the 1984 postseason, he would be there. It's a real tight back and forth game. It's tied at 17 late in the fourth quarter, but the Steelers drive. They drive really deep into Denver territory inside the 10-yard line. Denver's defense holds, but the Steelers now have the opportunity to take the lead with a 26-yard field goal, which is an absolute chip shot. I mean, that's like an extra point. Their kicker is Gary Anderson, who's the most accurate kicker in the history of the franchise, and he misses. He misses a 26-yard field goal.
He would do that 14 years later too. Yeah, in the
He would.
playoffs. Yeah.
He would. There's something about Gary Anderson in playoff games that did not go well. So now the game's still tied, and there's only about 2 minutes left, and Elway gets the ball back. And so you kind of know what's coming, right? It's going to be one of these patented John Elway drives the team down the field to get the game-winning field goal, and that's going to be the end of the Steelers. But instead, this happens.
Intercepted by Eric Williams at the 20. Williams is out of bounds at the 2-yard line. Eric Williams.
So Eric Williams, the very famous Steeler defensive back. I always say this is like the greatest play in Steeler history that absolutely nobody would remember. It's such a big play because he intercepts Elway and runs it all the way back to the 2-yard line. A couple of plays later, Pollard punches it in for the touchdown, and it's game over. And the Steelers win in the final minutes at Denver, really on the back of that turnover.
Yeah, Dick Enberg didn't even give him an oh my for that. So.
There was an oh my when Anderson missed the field goal. I almost played that just to get the Dick Enberg oh my.
Yeah.
It's a pretty shocking upset. Again, Denver was 13-3 that year. They had 4 more wins than that Steeler team, and they never lost at home. The Steelers do go on to lose the AFC title game the next week to Miami, but it's kind of a bright spot in an era where the Steelers really didn't have a lot of bright spots. Our fun fact for this game, we mentioned it was Elway's second year, but it was not his first game against the Steelers. His first game against the Steelers was actually his very first NFL game, period. It's at Three Rivers Stadium in week 1 of the 83 season, his rookie year. And in that game, there was a lot of hype around that game, given, everything that had transpired in the draft and everything. And it really didn't go so well for Elway. Donnie Shell picks him off. Jack Lambert sacks him. And Elway is pulled out of the game at halftime. And later, Elway had this quote from that game about, being in the NFL for the first time and about facing Jack Lambert. And here was the quote. He said, "He had no teeth and he was slobbering all over himself. I'm thinking you can have your money back. Just get me out of here. Let me go be an accountant. I can't tell you how badly I wanted out of there."
Yeah, good for him. He stuck with it. But I remember that. Didn't Lambert say something that he thought he was going to be a good quarterback or something like that, even though he'd had a bad game? Or I
don't remember, but I mean, if he did, he was right on the money. And like you said, Elway definitely, came back, and that certainly didn't define his career by any means.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's when like rookies just didn't come in and like, hey, look at me, I'm all like good. Like it took like a year to get great. Of course, I guess Marino had a pretty good rookie year, so maybe it's not completely.
Yeah, you're right. It's different than it is today. I think today you know that's why you see teams like cutting their first round pick in their second year now because they feel like they've had enough time to prove themselves. You saw that this past season with Washington and Dwayne Haskins, and I think back then sometimes those guys didn't even play until their second or third year, even though they were high draft picks.
But yeah, and then Buffalo kind of went the opposite with Allen. They really hung in there with him, and it's really paid off for him.
Right.
And Allen, like I thought that a couple years ago. I thought Allen reminded me of Terry Bradshaw before Bradshaw became the polished quarterback that he was. He really does. And Allen, boy, that really paid off for them, and it's nice to see it pay off for that kid.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about that opening game in '83, like I said, they pulled Elway at halftime, and then Steve DeBerg came in for the Broncos, and he actually won the game. So the Steelers lost that game. But yeah, Elway does pretty well after this. So let's jump ahead 5 more years. The 1989 divisional playoffs, also at Denver. And by this point, at the end of the decade, Denver is the clear-cut best team in the AFC. They've been to the Super Bowl twice. And in 1989, they have the best record in the AFC, and they're looking to win the conference for a third time. And Elway at this point, he's no longer a second-year phenom that was scared of Jack Lambert. He's now a Denver legend. He had engineered the drive to lead Denver past Cleveland in the '86 AFC Championship game. So at this point, John Elway is, legendary already.
Well entrenched.
Well entrenched.
He's even getting Simpsons references.
He was. The Steelers, meanwhile, have been suffering through years of decline. And they're coming off of what to this day is still their worst season of the past 50 years in 1988. And they promptly start off the 89 season by losing their first 2 games by a combined score of 92-10. So that 89 season looked like it was going to be just horrific. But miraculously, they start stringing together some wins. And it's not pretty, but they somehow, by the end of it, they squeak into the playoffs as the final wild card team. The Steelers that year have the NFL's worst offense. There was 28 teams and they were ranked number 28. Bubby Brister is the quarterback. He has more interceptions than touchdown passes. The leading rusher on that offense was rookie Tim Worley, who was nicknamed Whoops because he had a penchant for fumbling quite often. And that team, the offense was so bad, they were shut out 3 different times. I don't know that you really ever see that again, a team getting shut out 3 times in a season.
And making the playoffs.
Right. Yeah. And then making the playoffs. ESPN later names the 1989 Steelers as the worst team ever to qualify for the playoffs. But you know what? Not only do they make it, they also pull off a massive overtime upset against the Houston Oilers in the wild card game.
I wonder where ESPN's going to rank the whoever wins the NFC East in 2020.
Yeah. I'm sure there's been some candidates that could probably replace the 89 Steelers at this point. Now that you've had like losing teams make the playoffs, but at the time they were pretty bad in terms of a playoff team. But again, they pull off this upset at Houston, which gets Jerry Glanville fired. That's one of my favorite games from that era. And that earns them a trip to Denver for the divisional round. So just like 1984, the Steelers are big underdogs going to Denver, but I would say probably they're even bigger underdogs this time. Given the track record of the 2 franchises in recent years and the fact that this game literally matches the NFL's number 1 defense, which was Denver, against the NFL's worst offense, which is Pittsburgh. I mean, that was just a recipe for a 4th shutout. It really was. But once again, the Steelers are game. The hero, we talked about heroes and goats. The hero of this game is running back Merrill Hodge for the Steelers. He runs for 120 yards and catches 8 passes for 60 yards.
Merrill Hodge always had like great big games. Yeah,
he was a big game player for sure. And this was his biggest. I mean, they just could not stop him that day.
Merrill Hodge of all people, yeah. Because he was kind of a fullback too. He really wasn't a running back. It just was, I don't know. Because Denver didn't see it coming. I don't know.
Yeah, and he had a good game against Houston the week before too. I mean, I don't know what it was, but that was just, a guy in a moment kind of thing, I guess. The Steelers actually take a 10-0 lead in this game. So they're up 10-0 at Denver. And it looks like they're going to maybe pull off another huge upset. But Elway leads Denver back to make it a close game. Late in the fourth quarter, the Steelers actually still have a 6-point lead. And again, just like 1984, Elway gets the ball back late with a chance to lead the team down the field. But this time, Eric Williams isn't there to make an interception. And Elway drives the length of the field. They get the go-ahead touchdown in the game's final minutes. There was still some time on the clock for Brister to try to drive the team down the field, because when Elway scored, it made the score 24-23 Denver. So the Steelers are down by 1. If they can get into field goal range, again, that week before, Gary Anderson had won that game with a 50-yard field goal in overtime. And that thin air in Denver, if you can just get him sort of semi-close, you could maybe attempt a long field goal, but it doesn't happen. A wide receiver that no one would ever remember named Mark Stock drops a pass that would have been like a 20-yard gain. And then Brister fumbles like a low snap, and Denver recovers, and that's it. The game's over. So Denver wins. They go on to beat Cleveland in the AFC Championship game the following week, and they go on to once again get blown out in the Super Bowl against the San Francisco 49ers. Our fun fact for this game, Bubby Brister actually finishes the game with a higher passer rating than John Elway. Years later, of course, Bubby ends up being Elway's backup in Denver.
And it gets a Super Bowl ring for his.
Gets 2 Super Bowl rings, I think.
Yeah, I think he was on both, but that is like wild that Bubby had a pretty good game. Like, I guess they found their offense later in the season there. I mean, but like we said, the AFC wasn't all that great, and Denver's defense really wasn't. They had that one safety, I remember, if I remember correctly. Or was that the year before? I don't know. They just weren't very good in their secondary, because like the 49ers totally exposed them in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it was one of the rare times in the Super Bowl that you had like the league's #1 defense against a really good offense. You typically, when you see that in Super Bowl history, the defense is the team with the #1 defense is the one that either wins the game or at least doesn't get blown out 55-10, which is what happened to Denver in the Super Bowl that year. So maybe you're right, Steve, that maybe they had a good rate of defense, but maybe they had some holes, and maybe the Steelers started to exploit it in this game. And certainly the team, the caliber of San Francisco, was going to exploit it, big time.
I mean, if Mark Stock and Bubby Brister and, what's his name, Merrill Hodge, or I can't imagine, well, I guess you can imagine what Jerry Rice and Roger Craig they're probably going to put 50 points on you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now let's jump ahead to 1997. That's the next time these two teams meet in the postseason. And it's the AFC Championship game. And this one is at Pittsburgh. So in the 1990s, both teams kind of go through a transformation. The Steelers, like we mentioned, years and years of mediocrity in the 80s, but they become a contender again under new head coach Bill Cowher. And for Denver, they lost all those Super Bowls in the late 80s. They fire Dan Reeves. And they hire offensive coach Mike Shanahan, and he really reinvents the offense. He drafts a running back named Terrell Davis and makes him the centerpiece of the offense. And it works really well. It kind of makes it where Elway doesn't have to do everything by himself anymore. And by 1997, both of those teams are at the top of the conference. They meet in December of that year in a game in Pittsburgh. And it's a great back and forth game that the Steelers win thanks to their quarterback, Cordell Stewart, who accounts for 5 touchdowns. He has 3 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns. And we talked about that game in our episode we did about Cordell. I mean, Steve, I don't know. I always thought that was, if you want to talk about like Cordell Stewart's iconic signature game, I think that was it.
Well, the regular season game for sure, yeah.
Yes.
The playoff game, not so much.
No, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
So because Cordell and the Steelers had won that game, when the two teams meet for the AFC title, the Steelers are hosting it at Three Rivers. And, that I was fortunate to be at that game. And what I remember about being in the stadium that day is that, man, there was a lot of excitement. Like it was kind of like, we had beaten this team earlier. We could beat them again. Like we're going to the Super Bowl, and everybody was so pumped. And Denver got the ball first, and everybody was still on their feet. And right off the bat, this happens.
Many of the fans yet to take their seat on their feet. 2nd and 10. Elway guns a ball. Intercepted by Levon Kirkland. Turnover on the second play of the game.
And you can hear there, like the walls just like blow off the stadium. Levon Kirkland was this mammoth linebacker that had a career year that year in '97. And he picks off Elway on the second play of the game, and everybody just goes crazy. And you're thinking, Super Bowl, here we come.
Yeah, that was awesome. And number 99, he was still one of my favorite Steelers of all time, Levon Kirkland. It's a shame he never even, I don't think he ever even got to play. Did he get to play in Super Bowl 30? I think he was in Super Bowl 30.
He did. Yeah, he did.
But he never got a Super Bowl ring. But he was really, really good. And he was like, I don't know what if he was a hamburger under 275 pounds, I'd be lying. But he could run, man. Being that big, he could run. Like I remember him running with Ken Dilger, the tight end from the Colts. And he stayed with Shannon Sharpe. Like Shannon Sharpe, well, we'll talk about later in the game. But Shannon Sharpe has to push off to get open, So he was really good. He had a really great year.
He did, and he's kind of new after that play. He's kind of neutralized in this game by Howard Griffith. Howard Griffith was the fullback that was kind of like the open up the hole guy for Terrell Davis, and he kind of blocks Kirkland low a lot, which he kind of has to do because Kirkland's so huge. And Griffith relays a story years later where he says Kirkland got really mad at him, and he said, why do you have to dive at my legs to block me? And Griffith said, why do you have to be a 300-pound linebacker? So it's like touche.
Point taken.
Yeah. So again, the Steelers kind of have the early momentum, and they actually they have a 14-10 lead in the second quarter, and that's where the game really starts to turn. Cordell throws an interception. It's a long pass into the end zone, and it's picked off in the end zone. And then in the final 2 minutes of the half, Elway leads the Broncos on 2 touchdown drives. So that hurt because at the 2-minute warning, the Steelers are up 14-10. And then at halftime, it's 24-14 Denver. Like the game really turned on a dime in those minutes.
And there were some pass interference calls that got them down the field, but good teams get those calls, I guess. So we won't go Seattle Seahawk on it.
No, and they were touchy, but again, like you said, Steve, you have to be able to overcome those. And if it's even close to pass interference, that probably means you're kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of catching the offense. So the Steelers are down 10. They definitely, like, the life kind of goes out of the stadium a little bit, but they're only down 10, and they have the whole second half to mount a comeback. But like it never happens. They mount a really long drive in the third quarter. They get down deep in Denver territory, and then Cordell just throws a terrible interception in the end zone. And then after that, he can never really muster much. And we talked in previous episodes about like that difference between good quarterbacks and great quarterbacks. And I think for Cordell, Cordell started 2 AFC championship games, this one and the 2001 game against the Patriots. And people kind of remember him throwing interceptions and losing those games. I never felt like Cordell lost those games. I felt like we got down in both of those games, and then Cordell had ample time to lead us back, and then he threw interceptions. And I think that's the difference between a good quarterback, which Cordell was somebody that you're down in a big game and you throw interceptions, versus a great quarterback, you're down in a game. Larry Fitzgerald has just scored the go-ahead touchdown in the Super Bowl, and you're able to drive the team down the field and win it, right?
Yeah. Or Larry Fitzgerald scoring the touchdown in the first place in Kurt Warner's case, I would consider Kurt Warner a great quarterback. He's just been on the bad side. He's never had like teams with like a really great defense. Like I've always thought that about Kurt Warner. He's probably short 2 Super Bowl rings because he just played on some teams that maybe didn't have the greatest defense. And like he did that too. Like, under 2 minutes in the Super Bowl, I think Kurt Warner's thrown 2 touchdown passes, right?
I think it's 3 because
Yeah.
all 3 Super Bowls, he did that to beat the Titans, and then the defense held.
And then he did it against the Patriots, and he did it against the Steelers. I mean, who goes 1 for 3 in that situation?
I know.
I mean, Brady's because look at Brady's the same thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like Eli Manning, look at Eli Manning. Eli Manning's done about the same thing, and he's won both his Super Bowls. So I don't know. I feel bad for Kurt Warner for that, but he still made the Hall of Fame, and he's a good guy. But like once again, to the point is like that's the difference between like Cordell Stewart, Jimmy Garoppolo, like Trent Dilfer, like even like Mark Rippon, like it just like Jeff Hostetler, like even guys who have won Super Bowl, they're just not quite at that level that these other guys are. It doesn't mean they're bad quarterbacks. And maybe they just, like I said, they were on a different team. Like look at if Mark Rippon's on the Denver Broncos, they probably don't win a Super Bowl, And if you put John Elway on the Washington football team back then, they probably win a couple more Super Bowls. So more than the 3 they already did. So it's always, it's always tough because it's such a team game, and it's hard to pinpoint at one player, I think sometimes.
I think when you build your team with like that game manager, quarterback, and really good defense, that work, like you said, there have been plenty of teams that have won the Super Bowl. You just named a handful of examples. Plenty of teams that have won the Super Bowl with that formula, and plenty of teams that have come really close. But I think there's probably more teams that haven't won the Super Bowl in that scenario, and or haven't even advanced to the Super Bowl. And I think it's because no matter how great your defense is, if there's a great enough opposing quarterback, they'll get the lead. And then if you're down, all of a sudden the game manager quarterback can't lead you back. And that's what happened with Cordell Stewart in this game. He could not lead them back.
At some point, you gotta complete a pass. At some point, or maybe a couple of passes. And like you said, Ben's done that, and the other guys haven't.
Right. And that Super Bowl against the Cardinals, that was a great legendary Steeler defense that year. But they gave up the lead in the final minutes of the game, and they still needed the great quarterback to win it for them. So that's where the Steelers are in this game. Denver plays well in the second half. Terrell Davis gets going. He racks up over 100 yards. Like we said, Howard Griffith was really kind of an unsung hero for Denver in that game, leading the way for Davis.
Well, there's still that 3rd and 10 where Shannon Sharp pushed on. I don't know. I mean, he made a nice catch on Kirkland, but
yeah, that's at the end of the game. The Steelers do get a late touchdown, and then they use all their timeouts, and they have Denver down to a 3rd down. So if Denver converts, the game's over. If Denver doesn't convert, they punt back to the Steelers, and like you said, Shannon Sharp makes a catch there, and that's the ball game. I don't know, Steve. I kind of felt like people made a big deal about that for years, and like they still show it as like one of the great plays in Denver Bronco history that Shannon Sharp made that catch. And it was a 3-point game, so the Steelers would have just needed to drive for a field goal to send the game into overtime. But I kind of feel like if Denver punts there, I think
Cordell, Cordell throws an interception, or they don't make a play on 4th down or something. Yeah, I don't think Cordell had enough gas in the tank. You never know, but yeah, I don't know. I agree with you on that one.
So the Broncos,
it was kind of a garbage time touchdown, probably, quite honestly.
It was, but I mean, they technically did. If they would have stopped them there, they would have gotten the ball back. No timeouts, but like still enough time to potentially do something, and the Sharp play just ended it right then and there. So the Broncos go on to defeat the Packers in the Super Bowl 2 weeks later. That gives the AFC their first Super Bowl title in ages, but it also gives Elway his first Super Bowl title after so many years.
That one was for John.
That one was for John, yes. So definitely a big story and a good story there for Denver and for Elway. But kind of a bitter loss for the Steelers. That season, I'd love to do a whole episode on that 97 season because it's one of my favorite seasons. It was such a wild season. The Steelers had some crazy games in there. And I really liked that team, and it felt like they really had a good chance there to do something. And it was really disappointing that they lost that championship game at home. But that's the way it went. Our fun fact for this game, NBC aired that game, and during halftime, for the first time ever, they aired long lost footage of the Immaculate Reception. So before then, anytime you saw the Immaculate Reception, it was always that NFL Films replay with like Jack Fleming on the call, and they didn't have the tape of the TV broadcast of that game, and somebody at NBC that year found it, I don't know, in a warehouse somewhere or something, and they actually aired that at halftime. So that was really cool, being able to see that play in its TV form with Kurt Gowdy calling it for NBC, and it gave you some new angles and some things you'd never seen before.
Maybe
So I thought that was really interesting.
It was in Bob Costas' basement. He was, he put it on his chair to sit on to raise him up so he could get on his computer or whatever.
He just has like valuable footage of like NBC stuff.
Yeah.
It's like Kennedy assassination news footage, Immaculate Reception, just anything that's in the NBC archives.
Yeah.
So that's 97. The next time these two teams meet is in 2005, and it's also for the AFC Championship. This one's at Denver. We did our trilogy on the 2005 Pittsburgh championship season, so I'm not going to delve into this one too deeply because we really covered this game in depth in those episodes. So please go back and listen if you haven't. Those were really fun episodes and good episodes on that 2005 team. But just as a quick recap, the Steelers are the number 6 seed in the playoffs, but after a win at Cincinnati and a really shocking upset at Indianapolis, they find themselves headed to number 2 seed Denver for the AFC Championship game. And the 2005 Broncos, Elway's long gone by this point. They're no longer the team of Elway. They've kind of reverted back into this strong defense game manager mode. Like I said, we'd see that a bunch of times in this series. They had cycled through a bunch of quarterbacks post Elway. I think they drafted Brian Greasy and he didn't do well, and they had a couple other guys. And in 2005, they end up with Jake Plummer, who was a veteran quarterback, solid, and they had this really good defense. And as Steve detailed in our previous episodes, they had a really good running game. So they were very similar to what the Steelers had been for years under Cowher leading up to this point. And it was kind of ironic because they were like playing the Steeler role of hosting the championship game and having that game manager quarterback and good defense. The Steelers, though, they've redefined themselves as well. And to me, the biggest play of this game will always be what happens right before halftime. So the Steelers are up 17-3, and Ike Taylor gets an interception. Steve talked about in our episode we did. He talked about how Ike held the ball like it was a Ming vase, like he was afraid to drop it because Ike never held on to passes. So they get this interception right before halftime, and they're already up 17-3. And then they run this great play where I think it was an audible, Steve. Was that correct? Or Bettis scored that touchdown?
Right. Yeah, it was against the blitz. Like, if you listen to the Tunch Ilkin, like, he's describing a blitz that Denver's running, and that was like their counter to it was, I guess it was like, some sort of man coverage, and they knew if they could sneak Bettis up real quick through the offensive line, there would be nobody left to stop them. And I guess in that formation, for some reason, well, this is you're talking the play before, or
the one where Bettis scores, but they call it back.
Yeah, that's the play. Is I guess Hines Ward lined up on the tackle or got covered up by somebody else. Somebody lined up wrong. Too many men on this either too many men on the line of scrimmage or not enough men on the line of scrimmage, and they called the penalty for illegal formation. And note to all football teams that like whine and cry about the officials, and this is like a perfect example. Like the Steelers did this whole postseason. Is like they would something would go against them either on the field or just a bad circumstance, and they would overcome it, and this is a perfect example. So instead, they just got their touchdown wiped off, taken off the board, and maybe they're just going to settle for a field goal, which wouldn't be bad, 20-3 going into halftime. But Big Ben had other plans.
Yeah, and so here's what happens next.
Second down, 13, 15 seconds. Play action. Roethlisberger saw the first option, goes down, back to the end zone. Ball is caught. Hines Ward.
I remember when that play happened, I was like, oh my God, we're going to win the Super Bowl. Because it was so un-Steeler-like.
Well, it was like, oh, you took our touchdown off the board. We'll just score another one.
Yes.
Take that one off the board.
Yeah. I mean, like the years of conservative play and Marty Ball kind of, not taking any chances. And now we had this quarterback that they weren't afraid to let him scramble and throw it into the end zone. And I think, we talked, and when we talked about those when we did those 2005 episodes, we talked about like narratives that we thought were unfair, like Seattle and their referees. I think one of the other narratives that people still think about that year was, oh, the Steelers won that Super Bowl because they had a really good defense and Ben was a rookie quarterback that didn't play that well. And it's true, he did not play well in the Super Bowl, but that whole playoff leading up to the Super Bowl, they don't win any of those 3 games if it's not for Ben Roethlisberger.
He was money. You talk about big game, big player, and the difference, and that's why you just look at the plays he made. I mean, he made a tackle on offense, that saved their season. What quarterback does that? I just Ben's a legend. He's going in the Hall of Fame, and there's probably a whole laundry list of reasons why. And there, a lot of the reason I think Ben doesn't get the credit is some of it is he doesn't play in, he's not like Peyton Manning, who was just this absolute legend coming out of college and then, became the superstar. And I think the off the field stuff is always held against him. Like they'll never invite him on, like he'll never be like the spokesman for Progressive ever. I mean, neither will Michael Vick or Mike Vick or whatever,
No, that's a good point. And I just think people remember Ben not doing much that year because of the Super Bowl. And he did have a bad Super Bowl, but man, that play, it really ices the game. I mean, it's a 24/7 lead at halftime.
If you listen to the audio on the NFL film, because like we said before, like I ordered like the T-shirt, hat, and DVD as soon as the Super Bowl was over. But yeah, he says as soon as I threw it, I thought it was intercepted. Ben thought it was going to be picked off, actually. And if you watch the replay, the guy from Denver does kind of flash, but Ben just threw it so hard the ball got there too quick for him. And it's just, Ben was unbelievable. He's a really good quarterback. And when you can run around and break down a defense and then fire a pass like that, he said it was game over, 24-7 for the Broncos at least.
And I just, I had never really seen a quarterback. Again, we talked about us being kind of too young for the 70s teams. We had never really seen a quarterback that was capable of doing that. We'd always seen like the guys we talked about, like the game managers. And so Ben coming in, throwing that pass, that was the moment where I'm like, oh, we're gonna win this thing. And the Steelers do. They go on to win Super Bowl 40. And the other thing I think about that game in 2005, again, you talk about the 4 postseason games that year. You had Cincinnati, that huge rivalry that year, and Carson Palmer's injury. The Indianapolis game had all the drama of the Bettis fumble and the tackle. And then you had the Super Bowl. And I think, of those 4 games, probably the Denver game is the one that people would remember the least. Like, oh, no big deal, they beat Denver. But I mean, you said it earlier, Steve, it's a really hard place to win. And in fact, Denver had not lost a game at home that whole season.
They had not lost an AFC championship game to that point. And I still think, if I'm not mistaken, this is still the only AFC championship game Denver's ever lost at home. So, and fun, another fun thing that happened was I really wanted to go to this game in Denver. And I was like, I didn't want to go on like Seat Hub or Call a Scalper or whatever you did back then. So I got wind of, I guess I was on the Denver website, but the Denver fan club, the Denver Broncos fan club, was giving away tickets to that game. So I signed up and became a member of the Denver Broncos fan club, of which I am still a proud member of the Denver Broncos fan club. That and I am a Taylor Swift fan club member too, because I had to buy Taylor Swift tickets a few years back for my
Wow.
stepdaughter. So Broncos and Taylor Swift, I'm all in, baby.
Wow.
And if Taylor Swift ever goes to the new Mile High, maybe I can get in, really complete the trifecta there.
Well,
But yeah, it's funny because I get emails every so often. It's like, oh, Denver does this or Denver does that. It's like, I should unsubscribe to this. It's like, why not? Just let it be.
oh, that's really funny. Well, my fun fact for this game is going to pale in comparison to the story you just told. But my fun fact for this game, so we said, Denver was a lot better than I think people remember that year. And in fact, the team that they had beaten to advance to the championship game was the Patriots, who at the time had won 3 of the last 4 Super Bowls. And Bill Belichick, for whatever reason, I don't know if he was just bitter about losing to Denver or what, he actually calls Bill Cowher the week of the game to offer him intel on the Broncos.
He said, when they cross their arms, they're calling a running play. How do you know that, Bill? Don't ask. I just know.
Coach's intuition.
You know what? Why I always thought this before when the Rams played the Patriots, right? Like, wasn't there all these stories like he's buddy with Sean McVay? Like, why would you talk to Bill Belichick before you play him in a game? Why would you ever talk? Like if I talk to Bill Belichick, if somebody ever mistakenly gives me in charge of like an NFL offense, like God knows why they would. But I would just the week before the Patriots, I would just totally mess with his head. Like they literally tell him to play. They play, yeah, it's Red Right 99. Yep, we're running that. Sam Rutigliano called it in from the grave. First play of the game, Bill. Be ready for it.
Maybe he's just that charming that you can't help, giving him information.
They shut his offense. Like they had one of the veterans, and they said, why? What do you think he was doing, McVay? Like I don't think they didn't have a relationship prior to that. I just what do you think? Bill's just gathering information on you.
He's just using you.
Yeah,
don't fall for it.
Yeah.
So that's a great win. Again, we covered that in a lot of depth in those other episodes. The next time that these two teams meet is 2011 in the wild card playoffs. This game is at Denver, and it's known by many as the Tim Tebow game. So in 2011, the Steelers are the defending AFC champions, and the 2011 would be an interesting season to do an episode on too, because I've always maintained that I've always thought the 2011 team was better than the 2010 team that made the Super Bowl. Like in 2010, they had a good season. And I thought they got kind of fortunate in the playoffs facing Joe Flacco and Mark Sanchez instead of like Brady and Manning. Because their kryptonite all season was they couldn't beat good quarterbacks. And then they got into the Super Bowl against Aaron Rodgers and fell apart. So 2011, they go 12-4. And again, I really thought that team was better than the one the year before. They were actually able to stand up to good teams and good quarterbacks. However, there were 2 problems with that 2011 team. One is that they suffer a ton of injuries late in the season, really bad timing to get banged up. And they lose a key home game in the final seconds against Baltimore in November that gives the Ravens the division. So even though
where Flacco throws the pass to the running back, yeah.
I don't remember who it was to, but it was a touchdown pass with 8 seconds left.
I rember that. Yeah, I remember that.
And it was at Heinz Field, and they were down. It wasn't like tied; it was to win the game. So that the Steelers are 12-4, but they have to be a wild card, which sucks. I mean, usually 12-4 is good enough for a division title, but because they lose that game to Baltimore wins the division. So now the Steelers have to go on the road for the first round of the playoffs and they don't get that bye week or any rest for their injured players. Denver is an 8-8 division winner. They have a very interesting season. They start 1-4. They look like they're just a crap team, but then they make a switch at quarterback to second-year player Tim Tebow. Tebow was and probably still is one of the most celebrated college quarterbacks ever. I can't think of I can't think of too many college football players that had more accolades or attention or were more well known than Tim Tebow when he was at Florida. But coming into the NFL, a lot of people are not convinced that he has the talent to play quarterback in the pros. Denver takes a chance. They draft him in 2010. And now in 2011, being 1-4, they hand over the reins to him. And what ensues is Tebow mania. Tebow wins 6 games in a row. And those 6 games, there's a bunch of like nail biters, games where they're like down by 10 with 3 minutes left and they come back and win. Games that go into overtime. I mean, it turns into a phenomenon. People are posting pictures of themselves on social media, Tebowing, like kneeling down, like Tebow did after he scored. So it's a whole thing. It's like, sweeping the country kind of a thing. But Tebow does kind of cool off at the end of the season. And Denver actually is entering the playoffs on a 3-game losing streak. So like I said, the theme of, lucky to be there because of a bad division. The Steelers had that a few times earlier in the series. And now Denver's 8-8, but they get to host a playoff game because they won the division and the Steelers are a wild card, even though the Steelers have 4 more wins than Denver does. And so that's, they're in the playoffs. And just like the Steelers in 89, even a quote unquote bad playoff team can still do damage. And especially when you're playing at home, like Steve, you talked about what a big advantage it is to play at Denver.
It really was more of a home advantage. Well, you have it right there. Yeah, there's more to this home advantage than just, sleeping in your own bed in thin air. There's actually it affects the Steelers, I think.
Yes. And
I mean, you want me to expand on?
Yes,
okay,
go ahead.
So Denver ran basically the triple option is what they ran. And having watched Pitt play the triple option in Navy, the whole key to the triple option, and the McKeesport freaking high school coaches told Dick LeBeau this, is stopping the fullback. And you have to stop the fullback straight up. You can't play hero ball, I call it. And there's 2 guys, and I predicted, before this game, I said the Steelers are going to lose because they have 2 guys on that defense, and the third guy, the voice of reason, was not there. You have Troy Polamalu and James Harrison are ball chasers. If you're a ball chaser against this defense or this offense, you're going to get exposed. That's the whole point of this offense, is to nullify your everybody has to do your job. You have to do the position that you're playing, make the stop. So, and the problem was Ryan Clark has a sickle cell anemia. No, he doesn't have as bad. His sister had it worse. I actually was reading about it. His sister died young because she had it worse. And it's a genetic disorder that's common among African Americans. And when you stretch yourself out, the red blood cells sickle, it's very painful and can be deadly, can attack your organs. Ryan Clark had actually played in Denver earlier in his Steeler career in a regular season game and was out for a month. Like, they had to get rid of half his spleen, I guess, because it's something with the way the red blood cells. I don't know if that's where that isn't where they're produced, but there was something. He was sick for like a month and couldn't play the rest of the year. And Ryan Clark, God bless him, he wanted to play so bad in this game. I remember somebody needs to stop in and save this man from himself. And it was just, and he did end up going to the game and running around before the warm-ups. They let him run. But they had to play a guy named Ryan Monday, who was okay, but I just don't think he understood that Troy and Harrison are going to chase the ball. And that's what kind of happens if you watch. Well, we'll go through the game here. You get to, it's just
that was a huge disadvantage. Like you said, typically when you're playing on the road, it's like you said, you have like the home team gets to be in their own beds. The home team has the crowd noise. The home team might even have a weather advantage, like if you're, like if you're the Miami Dolphins playing in Buffalo or something, right?
Yeah.
But in this game, it's such a weird thing because Ryan Clark was the leading tackler that year. Like you said, he was key to stopping this offense.
Well, he
And-
could stay back. Like even if Troy did chase the ball, like if you watch the game-winning play, watch what Ryan Monday does. It's the most. It's still like as soon as I like, it makes me want to like, what are you doing? Like it's the typical, what are you ball chasing? What are you doing? Stupidity.
Right. And so it's one thing if Ryan Clark gets hurt and can't play the week before, but he's not injured. He's 100% totally healthy, and they can't start one of their key defensive
Well,
players.
I wouldn't say he's totally healthy. I mean, this is worse than like if he would have played, he could die.
No. But I'm saying
yeah.
he didn't like if they played this game at any other city in the United
Oh
States.
yeah, he's fine. Yeah, they playing in San Diego. He's playing.
He's
yeah.
playing. So that was killer. He's not the only guy injured. Rashard Mendenhall was the starting running back that year. He had torn his ACL. Ben had injured his ankle a few weeks earlier in a game against Cleveland. He was clearly hobbled. He was still playing, but he was hobbled. Marquise Pouncey was out for this game. Nevertheless, the Steelers are still 7.5-point favorites because Denver's an 8-8 team with Tim Tebow at quarterback. So I think a lot of people still thought Steelers would win. Denver comes out firing on offense. Tebow has 2 first-half touchdown passes, and Denver actually jumps out to a 20-6 lead at halftime. And the Steelers' defense is giving up big plays. The Broncos' leading receiver that year was a guy named Eric Decker, and he had gotten hurt early in the game. I think Harrison hit him low. And so they had a second-year receiver named Demarius Thomas, who ends up being a really great player for them in future years. He has 109 yards in the first half alone, and that was significant because in 2011, the Steelers' defense hadn't allowed a 100-yard receiver all season. And here, Demarius Thomas has 109 yards in the first half. The Steelers are also kind of tight, blowing chances. There's a drive late in the first half where Doug Legursky, who's only playing at center again because Pouncey's hurt, snaps the ball way over Ben's head. That blew a scoring drive. So just things not going well for the Steelers. But they do come back in the second half. Isaac Redman was the running back who was replacing Mendenhall. He has a huge game, 120 yards, 121 yards rushing. And then the defense kind of wakes up. They force a Willis McGahee fumble late. That leads to a Jericho Cotchery touchdown reception to tie the game at 23 late in the fourth quarter. And then one thing I think a lot of people forget about this game, but I remember it really clearly. The Steelers do get the ball back at the very end of regulation, and they actually have a 1st and 10 on the Denver 45-yard line with 30 seconds left in the game. So literally one more first down and they're in field goal range and they win the game. And they had 1st and 10. Ben, though, is sacked twice. The offensive line was decimated by injuries, but Ben also held on to the ball forever because they were running this offense. Bruce Arians is the offensive coordinator, and they're running this offense that's these long developing plays. And that offense, they had a lot of success with that offense, and they also had a lot of Ben getting killed and sacked in that offense. And after this game, I think the Steelers management had just kind of had enough, and they didn't think that was sustainable long term. I mean, Ben at this point is in his 8th year, and they just don't think that him getting hit that much is sustainable. And they actually fire Arians after this game. And I kind of felt like that last drive where they had 1st and 10 on the 45 and they couldn't go forward, and like they couldn't even throw incomplete passes or anything. Like the sacks just totally killed any chance they had to win it in regulation. And I think, to me, I don't know if that's when Steelers brass kind of made that decision, but to me, that was like the end of Bruce Arians.
Yeah, Bruce has a bad habit of getting his quarterbacks killed. He did that in Arizona after that too. He went through like 4 guys in one season. So,
yep.
Kept Brady upright though. I mean,
but that's the offense he runs. And if you watch, I remember being at games back then. The guy I sat next to at the games was a high school football coach. And he knew more about the X's and O's than I did. And he would show me, like, watch the routes, like watch the receiver, watch the routes that they're running. They were these long developing routes. They weren't, they wasn't good for quick kind of get the ball out of there kind of offense. It really depended on your line being able to hold up. And then Ben was such an improviser. That was his style of play. He liked to run around, scramble, try to make plays, but that got him sacked and hit a ton. And I think 1st and 10 at the Denver 45, what you needed there was like a 5-yard pass, right? Or a 3-yard pass. Like, just keep moving forward, get in field goal range. Even if you're attempting a 55-yard field goal at the end of regulation,
It's Denver again. Yeah.
it's Denver, and at least you have a
Yeah.
chance there. And again, they just went backwards instead of forward. So to me, like I said, to me, that was the end of Arians. So the game goes into overtime. The Steelers call tails on the coin toss. It's heads. And this game's unique because it's the first game with the new overtime rules. So what had happened was it was a real tragedy in the NFL because in 2009, Brett Favre went into overtime in the NFC Championship game, lost the coin toss, never got the ball, and the Saints went to the Super Bowl. And
I felt ripped off. Yeah.
Oh, it was just the most unfair thing that happened ever. Brett Favre never even got a chance. I mean, it really doesn't even matter that he's the one that sent the game into overtime with a terrible interception. It was just so unfair that Brett didn't get the ball. So we have to change all the rules. I mean, never mind that Tommy Maddox never got the ball in 2002 in that playoff game, and probably about 30 other examples where that happened and nobody cared. But it happened to Brett Favre. So my God, we have to change these rules. So the new rule was that in playoff games only, and they eventually adapted this rule to the regular season too. But in 2011, it was playoff games only. If you get the ball first and you kick a field goal, the other team gets to have the ball and have a chance to score. However, if you score a touchdown on your first possession, then the game's over. And this was the first time that a playoff game went into overtime under those new rules. So that ends up not really being relevant because on the first play of overtime, as many of you remember, Tebow hits Demaryius Thomas on a slant pattern, and he takes it 80 yards for the game-winning touchdown.
Yeah, and it's just like a perfect example of, like, if you watch Ryan Monday, he bites. It's a play action, and he bites on it, and it's like, what are you doing, Ryan Monday? Like, that's not your job. It's a perfect example with that offense. Your job on that play was to stay back and make sure the slant pass, if it was caught, tackle him or defend the slant pass, because you could see Ike is to the outside expecting safety help, and it just, oh my goodness, it was just, and that's why I just knew, like, and they played the same defense the whole game. They said that, and they said they dared Tebow to pass the ball to beat him, and I guess he was just, there was a lot of lucky passes by him too, like this, like ones that just, like, it was like 50-50 passes where the receiver went up and got the ball. It wasn't like that pass to that guy, it was only an 8-yard pass, but he put it on the money and in stride. And that's what, kind of cost the Steelers. So it wasn't like he wasn't zinging it around like you think. I mean, it's 300 yards passing, but
he's not exactly like surgically carving up the defense, but he's making the plays he needs to make. And for him, they bow out the next week against New England, and then he never starts an NFL game again. But I think for him, that's kind of his one shining moment in the NFL that gets relived a lot, and good for him. I mean, he's a really good guy, Tim Tebow. So happy that he has that. And I think, going back to like narratives and how people remember this game, I think so many Steeler fans think back on this game like this massive tragedy, upset. How could we ever lose to Tim Tebow? It's like one of the worst moments in Steeler history. I don't really think of it that way. I mean, I don't think it could be understated how decimated the Steelers were by injuries. I mean, we talked about Ryan Clark and how that was key. Just not having Ryan Clark alone was big. But we already said they didn't have Pouncey, they didn't have Mendenhall. Ben is hobbled, and then during the game, Max Starks, Casey Hampton, and Brett Kiesel, three pretty significant players, all suffer season-ending injuries in the middle of that game.
Yeah, I had forgot about that, and especially Casey Hampton and Kiesel, because you got to have those guys to be able to stop that. Like I said, that little, because like if they're going to get like 5-6 yards on that little fullback dive, that opens up the whole rest of their offense. And like if you can't stop that, Tebow's going to start to pull that ball out, and now he's going to get 10 yards, or if you can't, like stop it just with the people, not overcommitting. And when you add extra people to stop that play, well, now you got Tebow running or pitching the ball, and now you're in trouble. So,
yeah. So had the Steelers survived that game, had they not gotten sacked,
who would they had to play?
They would have had to go to New England without all the guys we previously mentioned.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, Doug Legursky, who as we said was the center subbing for Pouncey, and Chris Kiyomatu, the guard, they both would have been out the next week against New England, and Lamar Woodley would have been out against New England.
Yeah, it would have been hopeless.
It was almost, losing that game was a bit of a mercy kill. I mean, it really was, because they were done. Like that team was really good, but it ran out of guys.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of the tragedy of that season, because like I said, to me, that was a better team than the one that made the Super Bowl the year before, but they ran out of guys and they just couldn't overcome it.
Wow. Yeah, injuries are part of the game, and boy, and too, like, Belichick, the way Belichick coaches defense, he was, he wasn't gonna, his players weren't gonna be like chasing the ball. So that was, what was that? That was like 30-0 or something. I mean, that was never even a game.
No, it wasn't even close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our fun fact for this game is it's the final ever game for Hines Ward. He retires after the season, so that was Hines Ward's last ever game. Was
that 2011?
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow, 98 to 2011, a 13-year career. Oh, good for him.
Yeah, and he had ended that season with exactly 1,000 career receptions.
Yeah, so, and he was in Super Bowl 43, but he didn't do much, if I remember correctly. Or
yeah, he was in all three of those Super Bowls, and definitely Super Bowl 40 was his biggest game of those three. But a great career, and that was his last game. And really, by that point, he was not really effective anymore. So it was a good time. I think it was a good time. Good insight, by him not trying to hang on and bounce around to another team for 2 more years.
Yeah.
All right, the last game on our list, and the 8th time that these two teams met in the postseason, is in the 2015 divisional playoffs. This one's also at Denver. So most of these games are at Denver. I think the only ones at Pittsburgh were the 78 and the 97, and then the rest of them were at Denver, oddly enough. And in this 2015 game, the decimated by injuries theme will continue. So by 2015, both of these teams have very different rosters than the teams that had met 4 years earlier. For the Steelers, most of their 2000 era Super Bowl players are now gone. We mentioned like Hines Ward retiring, Troy retired, and Ferrier and Kiesel and Aaron Smith, like all those guys were kind of gone by 2015. And the Steelers, they go through a couple of 8-8 seasons, but they do a pretty good job rebuilding. They win the division in 2014. And they built this really high-powered offense around Ben Roethlisberger, who's still there. They have a good season. They're 10-6 in 2015, but it's a little bit of an uneven season. And they actually end up needing help from the Buffalo Bills in the final game of the season. The Bills upset the Jets, and that allows the Steelers to qualify as the number 6 seed in the playoffs. And in the first round, they go to Cincinnati and win an absolutely insane game in the wild card round. That I'm not even going to get into the detail there. That would almost be enough for its own episode.
Gary Porter was definitely involved.
Gary Porter was involved, yes. But they win that game, and now they're headed to Denver for the divisional round. But this is very different than when they went there in 2011, because the Steelers are a wild card, just like they were in 2011, but they're not like this dominant 12-4 team. And the Broncos are no longer an 8-8 division winner. They're the number 1 seed in the whole conference. They have the league's best defense. And that's really what led them to that best record.
And Von Miller and all that. Yeah, they were really.
Oh, yeah. DeMarcus Ware. And they had a great defense. And their quarterback is Peyton Manning, who, his first couple of seasons in Denver, he'd been setting records I think he what was it, Steve? 55 touchdown passes.
I think that's still the most in NFL history now in one season. He broke Brady's record, who had broke his record, who had broke Marino's record.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's 55.
So Peyton Manning.
Nobody's near that.
Peyton Manning was lighting the world on fire, but by 2015, well, in 2015, really, he kind of falls off a cliff. He has a bunch of injuries and he loses his starting job to Brock Osweiler. And Brock Osweiler actually starts about half the games that year for Denver, including the game at Heinz Field in December, where they play the Steelers. And in that game, the Steelers offense really puts on a show against Denver's great defense. They rack up 34 points in a just a huge win at Heinz Field. And again, we talked about their offense. They had these just really good players. Antonio Brown, I remember in that game, just had an amazing game. It didn't matter that Denver had this great defense. Antonio Brown just carved them up. But now that they're in the playoffs against each other, that great offense that had beaten Denver in December is severely depleted. So Le'Veon Bell was the running back that year. He's out for the season. Now, he had been hurt early. He got hurt in a Week 8 game against the Bengals. And I think that was Vontaze Burfict who hit him and tore his ACL.
Yeah.
But the Steelers had planned for this because that's what happened the year before. The year before, they lost Le'Veon Bell, and they went into the playoffs with some guy they had to sign off the street to start at running back. So in 2015, they're like, no, we're not going to let that happen again. And they go out and they sign D'Angelo Williams, who was a veteran running back who had played for Carolina. And when Bell gets hurt, I mean, I don't want to say they didn't miss a beat because D'Angelo Williams was not Le'Veon Bell, but D'Angelo Williams was really good that year.
And he was solid, yeah.
He was solid. And so they remedied that problem. Like, okay, no big deal. Like, we lost Bell, it hurts, but it's not going to kill us. However, in the regular season finale against Cleveland, Williams gets hurt. So now the Steelers are without their top 2 running backs. And then in the playoff game against Cincinnati, Burfict concusses AB. He's out for the Denver game. So no Antonio Brown, which was killer. And Burfict just took out our whole team that year. Burfict also drives his knee into Ben's shoulder in that playoff game. And Ben leaves. He's actually carted off the field. And then he very heroically comes back at the end. But he can barely throw the ball, and he's going to play in this playoff game. But I don't know, Steve. What's he? Maybe 60% at best for that Denver playoff game.
Maybe. And AB was definitely faking it because he winked at Pac-Man Jones.
Oh, that's right.
Perfect. Yeah. According to Dan Patrick. So I totally, because he just wanted to, take himself totally out of the AFC Championship game. And this is when all the concussion stuff was starting. They were trying to take the dirty hits out of the league. So. Yeah, I mean, it definitely was a smart play by him, faking a concussion so that he wouldn't be available the following week.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Against Denver.
Pac-Man said he was faking it and he would play, and then I think Pac-Man had to apologize or something because
he's never apologized to this day. Him or Dan Patrick. So okay, I guess he's still. I guess he's still faking it. Whatever.
So yeah, the offense that had scored 34 points against Denver just a month earlier. With D'Angelo, with AB, with a healthy Ben, now has none of those weapons heading into the divisional round against the league's #1 defense. Also at this point, Manning is once again the starting quarterback. I think he regained that job in the regular season finale because Osweiler kind of cooled off, and they said, okay, we're going to go back to Manning. And it's funny because Denver, even though Peyton Manning's the quarterback, the Denver team that they play in 2015 is similar to the team that they played in 2005. It's the really strong defense, definitely a stronger defense than they had in 2005. I mean, it was a really good defense and a game manager at quarterback. And that's it was weird to think of Peyton Manning as a game manager, but at this point in his career, I mean, that's what he is. So much like 1984 and 1989, the Steelers are huge underdogs going to Denver. And much like those years, they're up for the challenge. It's a game of really tough defense on both sides of the field. It's a game where there's a lot of field goals. Martavis Bryant steps up in AB's absence. He has 194 all-purpose yards. That guy was so talented. It's such a shame.
Yeah,
what happened.
I think we're talking about the Washington quarterback Haskins. I kind of almost file him under that Jamarcus Russell guy just. maybe not even that, but like a Joe Gilliam, like just the guy that had it all and just kind of like, let some, demons off the field get the best of them, which is a shame.
It is, because I mean, Bryant, that game, again, Denver has the best defense in the league, and they could not stop Martavis Bryant in that game. So with 10 minutes left in the game, the Steelers are clinging to a 13-12 lead.
Yeah,
And
I wasn't sure how they were leading at that point either. Like it was basically like Ben and like 10 college players at that point.
Yeah, just willing them to victory.
Yeah.
And they're in Denver territory, and they hand the ball off to Fitzgerald Toussaint. So Fitzgerald Toussaint is like the 19th running back on the depth chart that they have to play because everybody else is hurt. And he makes a nice run for a first down at the Denver 30-yard line. So they're going to have 1st and 10 at the 30-yard line with under 10 minutes left, right? So a field goal at a 13-12 game, a field goal is huge. And a touchdown, of course, would have been even huger. And if nothing else, you're at least going to run time off the clock. But at the very end of the run, Bradley Roby, who's the Denver cornerback, he's being blocked by Darius Hayward-Bay. He gets off the block and he hits Toussaint. Toussaint's kind of trying to cut back for a few extra yards. He has not squared his shoulders. The ball comes out and Denver recovers. DeMarcus Ware was the guy that recovered it. And his story of that play was he botched the play. So he thought it was going to be a bootleg. So he ran all the way to like where Ben would have like bootlegged to the side. So he's standing way away from the play because he thought it was going to be a bootleg and it wasn't. And when the ball pops out, it just happens to land right at his feet and he falls on it.
Yeah, it was a shame because I never blamed Toussaint for that fumble. It was just like a weird, like, didn't he get kicked or something? I thought he got hit. Like, it wasn't like the defense like made a great play. It was just like the guy was spun around while being blocked and he just hit the ball. It was very unfortunate. It wasn't anything like bad or, just unlucky, I think, more than anything.
It was like a very split second thing. And I think Roby, because he was getting blocked, I think his only chance was I'm going to try to hit the ball instead of, I don't think he
wasn't even trying to he just was spinning around, if I remember. Yeah. And he just happened to get the ball and like he had it held, or he just hit the ball and I don't know. Just one of those things. It happens.
It is.
Yeah.
So Manning comes back. He leads the Broncos down the field for the game-winning touchdown. Like we said, he was kind of the game manager at this point, but he's still Peyton Manning. And when you give him the ball back on a turnover, he's still capable of leading the team downfield. They score a touchdown, and the Steelers aren't able to come back after that. So the Broncos win the game. Ben has a heroic performance, 339 yards passing, playing with like no shoulder, and all of his best weapons hurt. And Manning has a very paltry 74 passer rating in this game. Like Peyton Manning does not play a good game, but he comes through for the Broncos when it mattered most, when the defense got him a turnover and they needed him to drive down the field to win the game. He does it. And that's kind of the theme he keeps going all the way to Super Bowl 50, where that really good Denver defense shuts down Carolina and he game manages them to their third championship.
Who'd they play in the AFC Championship game that year?
New England.
It wasn't New. That's what I thought.
It's always, if you ever wonder who was the other team in the AFC Championship game and you guess New England, it's probably New England.
Over the last 20 years. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know they played from 2011 to 2019, they were in every single AFC Championship game. And then they were in a bunch before that too. So like I said, if you guess New England, you're probably right.
Nice.
Nice. So that game, that game hurt because the Steelers had no business winning that game. Like Denver's defense was too good. We had nobody left. It was at Denver. And I think if we lose that game 28-3, fine. Like it is what it is. But like we had it. We had first down on the Denver 30 with 10 minutes left in the lead. And I do feel bad. Like you said, Steve, I really don't blame Toussaint either. I mean, not only was it kind of a fluke play, but also, I mean, you're putting him in a situation where the whole season's on the line.
Well, he's a special teamer, probably.
Right.
That's going to be his role, if any. And they needed somebody.
And he was a good story. He grew up in Youngstown. He had this really rough upbringing. His father was arrested at one of his high school games for stabbing someone. So that gives you any idea of what his home life was like. And he got a scholarship to Michigan, but he got suspended because he got a DUI. And he ends up going undrafted in the NFL, and he bounces around to practice squads. And now here he is starting a divisional playoff game for the Steelers. And up to that point, he actually was having a pretty good game, and he actually had the game's only touchdown. So it was just a shame. It was sad for him, and it was a bummer for the team. I don't know that they could have done much after that. I mean, AB would have came back,
He
and
still
maybe
would have
D'Angelo
been
comes
faking
back.
it against, yeah.
Yeah,
He'd have been
I guess he
faking
would
against
have.
New England still.
I guess the con
To-
would have been
to-
off by that point.
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep the ruse going the whole time. Yeah.
So I don't know how far that team gets, but it's just like, man, they had it. They actually had it, and they just couldn't close it off. Our fun fact for that game, Denver, like we said, goes to the Super Bowl. That's their 8th trip to the Super Bowl. And at the time, that matches the Steelers. Both teams had been to the Super Bowl 8 times. The Steelers, of course, have 6 wins to Denver's 3. But still, it just kind of shows you how dominant those two teams have been over the years in the conference. And, not surprising that they've played each other so many times, with both being so dominant over the years and over the decades. Both two really consistently good franchises, well-run franchises. So that's the 8 playoff games. And
One
so
more thing about that. I remember a story D'Angelo Williams told about this game that Tomlin literally cried after it. He was so upset, and he blamed himself. Tomlin blamed himself for losing this game to Denver. So, I mean, it's just, and Williams speaks very high. I mean, a lot of people speak highly, but obviously Williams just thought he never heard a coach take such responsibility for that. But an interesting story.
Yeah, and I don't know that I blame Tomlin for that one. Again, they were missing too many guys, and similar to that other playoff game in 2011. So I guess I'll wrap up by asking the question. We just heard eight really memorable playoff games, 8 huge games with a lot on the line, spanning, from the mid 70s to the mid 2010s. So, is Steelers Broncos a rivalry, Steve?
I don't know. What? I mean, I think you got to play every year for it to be a rivalry. I think that's what this is missing. There's definitely elements of the rivalry there, but I mean, I don't think Denver fans would consider us a rival. I mean, if you ask the Denver fan, who's your biggest rival, they're going to say Kansas City or Oakland or Vegas now, or what? They're not going to say the Steelers, And if you ask most Steeler fans, they probably, like you said, play Baltimore or Cleveland. So I think it's a very storied, I don't know, history. There's a lot of history there, but maybe just not because if they were in the same division, then I would call it a rivalry. But because they don't play each other every year, I would say that's why it isn't a rivalry, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I would say that I think you can have a rivalry with a team outside your division, but it has to be a bunch of big games against each other in a tight time frame. So we talked about the Raiders in the 70s. They did not play in the same division as the Steelers, but that was definitely a rivalry because they played each other in the playoffs 5 years in a row. So that's you can have a rivalry in that case. And I think these two teams, we talked about like so much success over the span of 5 decades, but they didn't have a lot of matchups all in the same tight time frame that was spread out. So yeah, I think not being in the same division, not having a bunch of games in the same era against each other, and I think you're right that Denver fans would say the same thing. They're not going to call us a rival, but I still think I think it's still a significant, series in the NFL. Steelers versus Broncos.
You could almost, see now. I mean, the Miami in the 70s and 80s, would be very similar. Probably there were some big playoff games. So, but recently, when's the last time? Well, I think we beat them in the playoff a couple years ago, Miami, but there really hasn't been, I would definitely say Denver outside of like Baltimore or Cleveland, like or any divisional, like Denver's like got to be right there. Like
Yeah, in terms of
Denver and New England, like right there. Like you don't ever think as New England, I guess, just had so much success against us. Although Denver has too. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I get that I just think because New England, just because they've won so much more, and stopped us in the process a couple times. I mean, that 2004 AFC Championship game is probably a lot bigger than a lot of these games, and we don't really have that kind of game against Denver.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said about New England, I think the reason you think of New England is because we played them a lot of times with a lot on the line. We played them in 2 playoff games in the late 90s and then the 3 championship games in the Brady Belichick era. So that's why you think of New England. That's the team you don't play every year, but you think of when you play them with a lot on the line. And I think you did the same thing with Denver, but again, it wasn't, you even talk about like 2011 and 2015 were only 4 years apart, but the Tim Tebow team in 2011 was a completely different team than the Peyton Manning team of 2015, right? So in the Jake Plummer
Tim
team of
Tebow
2005,
Tim Tebow definitely convinced John Elway to get Peyton Manning,
right? And so you didn't have a lot of games in the same era. Ben played in 3 of them, Elway played in 3 of them, but I think they're spaced far enough apart where you never think of them as a traditional rival. But I still think, again, 8 playoff games is nothing to sneeze at, and I think it's just worth remembering. And I think it's an interesting matchup that, again, a lot of Steelers fans and, to your point, Broncos fans probably don't think about. But there's been a lot of big games over the years.
Kudos
maybe in the future.
To Denver, man, for having such a home field advantage. I'm jealous. I mean, I wish Heinz Field was had the record that they have at home. I mean, that's unreal. I mean, you can almost remember the lot when you can remember the times the Denver's lost at home in the playoffs more than their wins. That shows how good they are. That's a tough place to play, especially in the playoffs. I mean,
they've had a better home playoff record than us. We've had a better Super Bowl record than them. So I think Denver did really well getting to the Super Bowl, but then maybe not so well historically in the Super Bowl. Like you said, a lot of that was during that era where the NFC was just so much stronger. So maybe we can forgive that. But I think that's, again, both teams, a lot of success, both teams, good ownership, and consistently, you don't see either of those teams really be super bad for super long.
Yeah. Well, Denver kind of changed. It's still the Bolins, but it's like his daughter, I think. Pat Bolin's daughter now is running the team or something like that. So, but Pat Bolin, I just remember him in his bid, what was that? Like that big fur coat he used to wear on the sidelines. But kudos to them. They got 3 Super Bowls and one of the strongest AFC teams, original AFC teams. So outside of Vegas or whatever, and Al Davis, that's probably the most successful AFL team, I would say. But
the Patriots probably a little more successful than them.
Yeah, I guess now if you include the recent history, I was thinking historically too, but yeah. But yeah, it was a good one.
All right, folks, thank you so much for listening. Please check us out on the web or on Twitter or on Facebook. All those links are in the show description. And please leave us a review if you feel led to do so. And we'll catch you next time.
All right, bye-bye.